familiar with yet, but this is a survey that the CDC does to get information about how teenagers, high school students are feeling on a number of topics, including certainly school climate, certainly violence, certainly drug use, and other issues. And it's a really important survey that's been done year after year after year. So we have a lot of comparative data. And the final report was just released yesterday. And so I've just taken a quick snapshot of the section on school violence. And this is just one of it's a huge report, but this is just one of the pieces of it that really looks on this concept of threat and violence. And we see here that there's been some trends that have stayed the same over a number of years. This is, by the way, this is up through 2021. The CDC is always looking at data a couple of years behind. And so we're looking at 2021 data here. But you can see that in some cases, things have stayed the same. In some cases, at least bullying seems to have gone down a little bit, which is great news. But we do see a couple of things where things have gotten a little bit worse. Students reporting not going to school because of safety concerns, sexual violence, both on the rise a little bit. And what's important to note too is that you can dig into the demographics of these and see some very interesting patterns related to different demographic groups. So certainly this is a topic, again, that we talk about and we do address in our schools. And what it tends to center around for a lot of us is how students respond to different, and it's not just students too, it's adults, it's all of us who work in schools, right, who respond to these things. We tend to look at three different areas. And one is how students and how all of us experience stress, because these are the things that can trigger us and can affect us, is when we have a response to something. And stress can be positive. It can be youth stress, which is positive stress, which actually helps us get ready for things like presentations or teaching a lesson. It can get us actually up and ready for that. It can also be something, though, that is really about the wear and tear on our bodies. And so we look at those things that make us stressed. So stress is a normal part of life, but if it becomes more than what we can handle, it can really start to have a negative impact on us. Every time we feel stress, we feel an emotion, and it's really important to name the emotion that you're feeling when you are having it, because that helps in your ability to respond to whatever it is you're feeling, whether it's stress, anxiety, or trauma. Anxiety is another natural part of life. We all feel anxious about things that are coming up. Again, it can be something useful to get us ready and prepared, get our bodies and minds ready and prepared, but it can also become overwhelming. One of the things that we know is that when stress or when anxiety begins to get in the way of the normal operations of my life, now it might get into something like an anxiety disorder. And we know that 8% of teens have an anxiety disorder with symptoms that began as early as the age of 6. I will tell you, I've done a number of trainings now with preschool staffs who are dealing with school refusal, kids who are 4 or 5 years old, who are refusing to go to school because they're so anxious. We also know that only 18% of those teens receive medical health care, which is a real problem, that there's a huge disconnect there. And then crisis and trauma. Again, crisis is an event that can disrupt a child's normal daily activities. It can threaten our feelings of safety and well-being. It can be natural events like storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, lightning, thunder, all those kinds of things. It could be events. We could have accidents, train derailments, car accidents. It can be violence of all different kinds. All these things can be crisis events. But remember that a crisis stretches our capacity to cope. A trauma overwhelms that capacity to cope. And that's where we begin to see the wear and tear on kids and the wear and tear of adults. So why all this is important is because why we know all this is because of neuroscience. We know, and especially in the last 15 years, the explosion of our understanding of what happens in the mind and the body when it comes to stress, anxiety, and trauma. We know, because we can see in MRI scans, what happens when the amygdala, which is the fight, flight, or freeze response of our brain, the oldest part of our brain, responds to these things, stress, anxiety, trauma, whatever it is, and it can be real or it can be perceived. our amygdala responds the same way. It takes over. There is a physiological change in our bodies that occurs, and the prefrontal cortex is usually not online at that moment. The amygdala has taken over because it has triggered the fight, flight, or freeze response. We actually physically see a difference that when the sympathetic nervous system, the sort of gas pedal is engaged, our pupils dilate, our heartbeat accelerates, and you can see this. You can see kids who talk about, my heart is racing right now, or whatever, when they're having that kind of triggered response. But we also know the same is true with the parasympathetic nervous system, that when we get into a place where we can calm ourselves, we can begin to engage the prefrontal cortex. We can engage the sympathetic nervous system, which is going to calm us and bring us to a place where we feel regulated. That's the good news, that there's all kinds of things we can do to build coping and resiliency skills. And that's what the educators on this panel are doing in their schools. They are developing ways to help kids learn coping and resiliency skills. We are teaching social and emotional skills in our schools, in our classrooms, to help kids understand themselves, understand their relationship with others, and how to make good decisions. And all that is important because we also know that when any of us are in a positive relationship with another human being, that is actually preventative and restorative. When we encounter with high levels of stress, anxiety, or trauma, when we are engaged with someone else, when we have an adult in our life, when we have a peer in our life who can be in relationship with us, that helps. That helps. The other thing that helps is taking care of ourselves. And it's really important to think about, just as we think about how we should eat right, we should sleep right, we should also think about having a mental health hygiene plan. What are we doing to purposely create a situation every day in our lives where we are getting to that resting place, we're getting to a place where we start to feel good about the world around us, so we can begin to repair the stress, anxiety, and trauma that we've experienced, and to be ready for the next thing. Because crisis is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. These things are going to happen. I'm going to get stressed. I'm going to be anxious. There's going to be some kind of crisis. I need to figure out those skills on how to get through that. So this, I hope, creates a little bit of a common language, and is a lot of the work that I see happening across the state in school after school after school, as we're trying to develop schools that are not only teaching the brains of our children in terms of cognition and learning, but we're also trying to teach them the skills of social and emotional and physical well-being. Today, we're really, really excited to have with us three educators to help us talk about and think about these ideas. Angelica Schab is the Director of Family Services in District 63, which is a pre-K-8 school district of over 3,400 students serving Des Plaines, Niles, Glenview, Park Ridge, and Morton Grove. She's served in leadership positions within multiple youth development organizations, including the North Suburban YMCA, Companies That Care, and the Union League Boys and Girls Clubs in Chicago. Mary Kalou is an assistant superintendent for Maine Township District 207, where she is the Chief School Business Officer. She's also served as an assistant superintendent in both Arlington Heights, District 25, and Lake Zurich School District 95. And Jadine Chou is the Chicago Public Schools Chief of Safety and Security. Under Jadine's leadership, the Office of Safety and Security helps more than 640 schools develop safe and calm environments and positive student behaviors, which has resulted in a significant reduction in disciplinary issues. Jadine has previous experience leading safety and security efforts for the Chicago Housing Authority. She's also a Northwestern alumnus with a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering. So we're glad to have her back as well. And I love that all three of you represent K-8, high school, and K-12, and these are districts that we work very closely with. So thank you so much for being here. We're going to start by asking each of you, what are your schools or districts doing to prevent or respond to the various crisis situations that your teachers and staff are encountering? And I don't know, we'll start maybe with Mary. Can we start with you?
Of course. So I think on a prevention front, I will classify it into two strands. The human strand, which is, what are we doing to to put students first and prevent their mindset. And we've gone to social emotional learning throughout our curriculum. And we've also adopted a couple of years ago an advisory program where we really want every student to be connected with an adult in the building. And then from there, I would say those are the biggest prevention, but then we also, you know, as any school does, we have a significant threat assessment program where anybody can be referred and a student can go through the series of threat assessment questions to determine if there is an element of safety and danger in what that student is doing. And then, you know, one of the things after we've studied and brought, you know, what the aftermath and autopsy of school shootings, you've learned that there were kind of nuggets and themes that people knew before an incident. So we encourage all teachers and we train teachers to look for that information, whether it be in writing in social science or English, or a depiction of artwork in art class, or any other element. And then finally, on the human side, we have an anonymous tip line. So as high schoolers, they may not feel comfortable talking to someone, but they can submit an anonymous tip. And based on what that tip says, it's either generated automatic. So if it's an immediate threat, it goes to 6 or 7 people immediately and via phone call, so it can be followed up on. And if it's more of something that can wait a day, it gets emailed to the appropriate person's inbox. And on the physical plant side, then we've just gone through an extensive remodeling program. We have secured vestibules, and those vestibules look like they're made of all glass. And when they are made of glass, they are bullet resistant glass. Our thought process was, you know, a lot of people have an initial poor interaction when they come into a school. And if we can keep them contained into that area, we'll do that. Of course, all of our classroom doors have locks and they should be locked automatically. We went this year, we scan all of our students in using their ID when they come in the building, and they're only allowed to enter about through 3 entrances. Athletic events, we have a no purse, no bag policy now. We created what we call an emergency command center within the building, because we asked the police department, what do you need from us? Mm-hmm. And they said, in the event of an active shooter or a crisis, we need to know where we need to go. Mm-hmm. So in that command center is all of the cameras and a PA system, as well as an emergency announcement system, so that whoever's in the command center can be the eyes for the police department. Because the police are like, it's great that you gave us access to the camera system, but in an emergency, we're going in. We're not going to look at cameras. And then I don't know if you want me to jump into response or give everybody a chance to answer the prevention piece first.
Well, let's start with prevention. I think that was a great start, and you hit on a bunch of topics that I think we'll hopefully be coming back to as well. So Angelica, why don't we hear a little bit about what you all are doing in terms of preventative work?
Yeah, I think fairly similarly to what Mary shared, in terms of prevention, we have social emotional learning that's embedded into our curriculum, and we're recently transitioning to the ruler model, and to really weave that social emotional learning throughout all of everything we do, right? And additionally, we're monitoring students and what they're doing and kind of how they're speaking and doing those threat assessments as they come up, to decide, determine whether it needs to be escalated or whether it's not a threat. There's a big, see something, say something, in terms of, if your friends are saying things and whatnot. That typically happens more at the middle school level. And there's also a place where they can anonymously inform administration of what is going on or what they've been hearing. And that goes, through social media as well, that maybe none of us are privy to, have access to. So hearing from the students who are on those chats and apps and things is definitely helpful. You know, and another key piece of prevention is creating those welcoming spaces for our students, and managing behaviors and bullying and anything that might come up as they come up, and making sure that our kids feel safe within the building, and both emotionally and physically. In terms of our building security, we have new exterior doors on all of our buildings. They are also bulletproof, bullet resistant glass. We have vestibules that are all contained within every entrance. All of our buildings now are a buzzer to enter versus just having open vestibules for anyone to come in. Goodness, what else are we doing? You know, and we meet with our first responders annually. We go over all of our protocols. We train staff how to manage in different crisis situations that might come up. You know, and we work with the fire and police department to have Knox boxes on our buildings so that in the event that they needed to enter, they would be able to enter.
Cool. That's a great addition. Jadine, you want to tell us a little bit about what you're all doing in terms of preventative work?
Yeah, so thank you so much. Similarly to what you've already heard, we also believe strongly in the importance of social emotional supports and learning for all of our students. And I think people have said this in different ways. I'll just put it out there. At Chicago Public Schools, our motto is safety is about relationships. And so we believe strongly, and I think Kavita said it, if every student has at least one trusted adult that they have a relationship with, it will be so much better for everyone, but most of all for our students, because we believe that safety is holistic, which has become a catchphrase, but we've been trying to achieve that for like the last 10 years. It's not just physical safety, it's also emotional safety, as well as relational trust. So if you're doing all three of those things, you go a long way to making sure that you're being able to prevent situations from happening. People will tell you things, you know, this is up, this is, you know, and so we believe strongly that is the way to go. I'll add a couple more things that we do in addition to building a climate and culture that is welcoming, that again, trusted adult. Some things we're doing, we do have a social media monitoring relationship with an organization called Supporting Our Schools, or Safer Schools Together, I'm sorry. And they help us look for worrisome behaviors, and that is, you know, either potential homicidal, potential suicidal, other bullying type of issues. Also, from that, we have a robust threat assessment process. It's centralized, actually. We're a big district, 640 schools. So we do that centrally in partnership with schools and law enforcement. Every morning we meet with the Chicago Police Department. So we have a very tight relationship with them across the city. And then I'll just say, we have solid safety plans that are unique to every school. Every school has a safety and an emergency response plan, so to be sure that we're ready and prepared. I'll pause there.
You know, I think it's really useful. And again, I don't know, you know, here we are, you know, many of us ready to go in and be teachers and do this work. And I don't know if we always get to hear about the amount of work that we do, you know, to prepare all the way, starting with and going back to the physical building. I didn't know what passive security was until I started getting into the reconstruction of a building, and to think about how we can redesign schools to be more safe just by simply the architecture and the layout, and to building materials, to all the electronic means that we have now at our disposal. And then when we think about the protocols and the systems that we put into place, it's pretty amazing. And again, not something that we, you know, necessarily talk too much about. So that, you know, I think that's where some of the questions are emanating from, are questions like, what do you all expect teachers to know and to do as part of these plans? So I'm curious to hear, what you do to help teachers. This gets a little into crisis response in helping us understand, what are you telling teachers? How are you training teachers? What is it that you expect teachers to do in those crisis situations? And I'll just open that up to whoever has got something ready to go.
I'll jump in. I'll start.
Sure.
So it's all about shared responsibility. And I have a lot of friends, and actually two of my nieces are teachers. So very personal, obviously. And, teachers are the ones that have the relationships with the students. And so they are the ones that students will look to first in the situation of a crisis. So it is about starting with preparation, with training. And so every year at the beginning of the year, we do training. There is training on, again, sort of our safety philosophy, as well as in the event of a crisis, God forbid, there's a situation like an active shooter, there is training to make sure they are prepared. In addition, and all schools probably on this call all follow the Illinois Safety Drill Act. And so we have to conduct all of our emergency drills as well. We do above and beyond what is required by the law to make sure schools are prepared. And lastly, we do a lot of conversations with our teachers. And so actually that's where I was running from this afternoon, down to the school, meeting with teachers to hear some of the concerns they've had coming out of the pandemic. We've seen trauma that we've never seen before. So some of the things that are happening, I've been here 12 years, by the way, some of the things we're seeing now we've never seen.
Wow.
And so they wanted to talk through that. And so we're problem solving with teachers real time to make sure if there are situations they don't feel prepared for, that we're giving them that kind of guidance. So if it happens again, that they will know what to do.
Cool. Angelica, you want to go next?
I think key for us is the same, is pretty similar to prepare our teachers for what they might be faced with. Of course, there's a training there's the ALICE training at the middle school, which is a little bit more intense. At our elementary schools, we do run, hide, fight training, which is fairly similar, but it is, certainly less intense than ALICE, or the way that those are presented. But we do, the same thing in terms of we drill. So we have, soft lockdown and hard lockdown drills. We also do that additional training for an intruder or somebody who's coming in with a weapon. And, we talk through different things, different ways that, we also use the Safer Schools software to be able to understand if there's something happening. So we certainly talk through the administrators at each school, talk through what are some things that we're looking for in terms of it's going to alert us to a potential crisis that needs to be managed and mitigated. But really just keep your eyes open and make those relationships with the students is very important, because they, like Jadine said, they're the ones who are with those kids day in and day out. So they'll be the first to notice something's not quite right. So certainly developing those spaces.
Mary?
Yeah, so we also use the ALICE protocol, but I think we're somewhat unique in that we train all of our substitute teachers and our students in the protocol. The training for students is slightly different than the teachers, but we know in a true crisis, we're going to have a number of teachers that are just going to simply shut down. So our thinking is that probably then somebody in their class, one of their students, is going to step up and help them follow the ALICE protocol. Because, and we'll use an example. For instance, we had to do a soft lockdown on the first day of freshman attendance this year at one of our buildings. There was, the police got a report of somebody with a gun outside in the surrounding area. It turned out to be a BB gun. They were hunting a rabbit in a yard. So, but one of the teachers immediately freaked out, and then we kind of went back through the teachers. It's like, communication is key. And I think that in a crisis, the more information you have, because everybody is going to be faced with a soft lockdown. I mean, we've had one at each of the schools. It is simply a precautionary measure. And I think explaining it that way to participants is going to go a long way in terms of alleviating their anxiety about what's going on.
Mhm, mhm.
Can I jump back in, Tim?
Please.
So since they both mentioned Alice, I feel compelled to mention the other method that is out there, which is what we use. We actually call it ELSA. I think we made that up. It stands for Evacuation, Lockdown, Shelter in Place, and All Clear. And it's different for us. And so I always, when I'm on these kind of panels, I like to explain what works for Chicago Public Schools may not work for other districts. So it's not, what I'm about to share is necessarily not a critique of other methods or other plans, but what works for us. We're very lucky. We have the Chicago Police Department. One police department is Chicago Public Schools, and it's a police department that we work very closely with. And so we standardize that response. And so we don't use Alice. We don't use Run, Hide, Fight, because the agreement we have with CPD is, God forbid there's an incident, we will have the immediate response. And, you know, Mary, I think it was sharing, like, you know, at some point we're going to have a lockdown at this school, at this school. In the city of Chicago, it's inevitable because it's not even what's happening in the building, but what's happening in the community. So a shots fired or a hostage situation, a domestic situation, all of that will drive a lockdown. We have to go to lowest common denominator. And for us, that is the simplistic. We have lockdown, we have soft and hard lockdown. And I share that because from our standpoint, again, if we get that instant response, our police department has said to us, we don't want people making split-second decisions on their own. We want to know what we're walking into, which is that y'all will be following the protocol that you've drilled on. And we won't have, you know, kids running out of the building and so forth. Again, it works for us. And in our discussions with teachers, we get asked, why aren't we doing Alice? And we have a whole list of reasons why Alice is not appropriate for our school district.
Mhm, mhm. And I think that's really a great example, again, of, you know, what school districts have done in the last, it's really been 20 years of going through these kinds of conversations, experiences. And I would say one school district will choose something different based on the experiences that they've had or not had. Definitely the context of where they're located, whether it's in a rural area, a suburban area, or a more urban area, they're making different decisions. But I would say that the commonality that we've all agreed on, really, and certainly is this alignment with police, fire, and rescue. We've learned a lot of lessons over the last 20 years, and that's not just school situations, whether it's been a natural disaster or violence. It's also been 9/11. It's been all kinds of other situations where we've had problems and mistakes because there was not alignment between these various levels of you know, public institutions, and things are much better than they were. All about communication, but also about protocols, and that's I think a really good piece to think about is, again, how much work is happening in conjunction with all these different public entities to make sure that when there is an emergency, and by the way, it goes the other direction. And I don't know if it's probably true, but most schools are also part of community responses. If there was, say, a train derailment and we needed to have a unification center, we've had to do a vaccine distribution. Schools are being asked to be members of that community, just like we ask the services in the community to come and support us. And so there is this really important relationship that schools are playing in the community when they need it and when others need it. We can be there for them. So, you know, we have these drills now, which are different than what we had. We didn't have these kind of drills 20 years ago. We did have fire drills. We always had shelter, you know, tornado drills, bus evacuation drills, and we've added these other drills to it. And we have incidents that have occurred, and we have incidents that we see in other communities on television, and the kids hear this. So our next question is, you know, what advice do you give teachers, or would you give us as teachers, about how to work with kids? And again, each of you represent different ranges of student development, and how we might talk to them may be different in second grade than it is in seventh grade than it is in junior year. So what advice would you give teachers about talking to kids about these drills, but also these incidents, before, during, or after an incident, and how might that look different depending on the age of the student. So again, whoever's got something ready to go, I'll go with the first person to jump here. Mary.
So I think, that's kind of what, when we do the ALICE training with our students, it's an announcement, then it's table talk in their classes about, okay, what would we do? How would we think? So, what do we expect of teachers? We kind of expect teachers to go through and remain calm. I think it's, in some ways, I'm fortunate and unfortunate to be in a high school district because a lot of incidents happen in high school districts. But the fortunate thing is that students kind of engage in the process and understand what the process is like. So, and we've spent a lot of money trying to make sure that communication in a crisis can occur. And to the fact that we are now using our fire alarm system in a crisis communication because we find that it has far superior coverage than our public announce system. But we really want teachers to reassure kids. Sometimes that's hard because we have a number of people who were residents of Highland Park, new people in Highland Park, and they're this year going through some trauma of their own anytime we kind of do or bring up these drills. And I think that having them have a conversation with their classes around that when they do the ALICE drills has been important for them this year. So, what are we expecting? We're not expecting every teacher to have the answer, but we're really kind of expecting them to do the best that they can do with the training that they've been provided in a very high tense, stressful situation.
I think one of the key points is to talk about preparation, and in terms of, when you're explaining fire drills, you're explaining inclement weather drills, bus evacuations, you're saying we need to know all this information in case something happens and we have to respond. And so just like it becomes muscle memory, just like things become the norm, that's kind of what we're doing here as well, because we want everybody to be safe. We want everybody to practice what we would do if someone came into the building to try to hurt someone else. And again, it's developmental. Like, you're not going to have developmentally appropriate conversations. You're going to have those kinds with the younger grades, and up in the middle school grades for us, you might dive into a little bit more about what's been happening with Highland Park and things like that are pretty close to home. But I think that's what I would share with the teachers to share with with their students, is that they are prepared, they are trained, and now they're going to share that information so that the students are prepared and they feel empowered that they also have this information and they can react and respond appropriately and accordingly. Certainly when we're actually faced with a crisis, we don't know how anyone's going to respond, but the hope is that the information is empowering and the preparation puts that kind of just always a way to react.
That's great.
And the only other thing I'll add, in our world, again, we put a lot of stock in prevention. We do a lot. And, I get asked all the time, hey, can we put up more metal detectors? Hey, can we put up more bulletproof glass? And all of that is possible. But we always tell everyone, if someone, really hell-bent on doing something is going to figure a way around those things. So it's as if not more important to do all those prevention things. And so in terms of the conversations we have with teachers, we really come at it from a point of empathy, which is, we understand, especially a lot of the teachers who've been, tenured, who've been around for a while. We understand that when you decided to be a teacher, maybe this wasn't a part of the, the expectation, but it unfortunately has become like that. And we look at it from a point of view from a family, which is, I know all the teachers I've met, they grow to love their students like children. They're like their family. And so we think of this as everyone is in this together, and it's everyone's responsibility to make sure the school is safe. And so it can't just fall on the security officer if your school has security. It can't just fall on the principal. We all play a role. And one of the challenges we have is in some of our schools, it's actually thankfully been very safe. And so sometimes people take safety for granted and they get a little bit, they kind of forget, oh, I'm going to go out and prop the door. I got to run in my car for a minute. And we have to remind people that 1 minute you're propping the door to run to your car, something could happen. In addition, I think that it's important not to scare people, but really it's an encouragement. And that's why, again, with our process, it's pretty much, someone said muscle memory, like ours is like, here's your muscle memory. You don't have to think too hard about this. If you do this, let us do the rest. And I think that is helpful. And if someone is experiencing their own trauma, maybe some, post-traumatic stress from an incident they've experienced somewhere else, we really want to know about that so we can work through that. A lot of this is about mental health and well-being. And if, it's that whole thing, and this is such a cliche, but I use it a lot, the whole put your oxygen mask on first before you can put it on someone else is so real. And so the point about staying calm, taking care of yourself, if you can't do that, let us know so we can help you.
Yep. There's a wonderful metaphor called the window of tolerance that really gets into trauma response, but it's also about the stress, anxiety, and trauma I was talking about earlier. And that window of tolerance is how resilient am I? How am I able to cope and stay within that window of tolerance? When I get outside my window of tolerance, when I'm hyper aroused or I'm hypo aroused, I'm either agitated and I might be acting out, or I might be shut down. And so we want to help people stay within that window. And one of the things we know is that a dysregulated teacher is never going to be able to help a dysregulated kid. But a regulated teacher, a teacher who's able to sort of manage these things, have good coping skills, it's that oxygen mask metaphor that Jadine talked about is really important and very real. I want to go to a question that Kristen asked about prevention. We see when we start talking about, working in conjunction with the police, which tends to be, we think about kids getting arrested, or we think about police coming into a school building. Can you talk a little bit about the prevention side of things? So what are you doing to build relationships with, whether it's police, fire, emergency, or other social service organizations that might eventually be a part of that work, but are where we're really trying to reduce the number of crises that we might have to help kids before a crisis occurs? How do you develop that relationship, and what does that relationship look like?
I can jump in. So for us, we have so we're Maine Township, and so we serve several different municipalities, which gives us different police departments to work with. So each school sort of has their own go-to police department, whether it's the sheriff or the individual village or city. So those relationships have been well established. I know a lot of the schools have fire and police come in and do visits, and they'll talk to the kids and do their fire prevention and safety to begin to build those relationships. In terms of police in our community, there's a neighborhood watch that meets once a month with the township. So that's building a community and a community response. And our police are the ones coming in training, so that for us, it's run, hide, fight. And so we continue those trainings at all of the schools. Then they get to meet the officers that are putting them on and have those conversations and be able to ask any questions that might come up to help that.
We have a school resource officer program. So we've kind of, I would say over the last couple of years, kind of changed how they're perceived within the buildings. So they're more engaging with kids. They're not writing tickets. They're seen as kind of a resource and someone to talk to and build relationships with, rather than being the one that's the disciplinarian. And I think that helps we have 2 municipalities, and I think that was our big hurdle was kind of getting them on board with, we were kind of like, it doesn't matter what we're trained in, but we want the school and the police department trained in the same thing. And we want all of our schools and teachers to have the same protocol, because we can't operate in 4 different ways. And I think the police departments were very much excited and willing to get together, even cross police departments, to work on some common things. But I really think that, so we have the behind the scene protocols and protections, but we've really put a different face on what the SRO looks like in our schools.
I know when I was principal, we're lucky that one of our, we had, I think, 6 police departments that we worked with. One of them had a full-time social worker, and she was fantastic. And as someone who came in regularly to work with our students and our staff, that was a really wonderful relationship with her. And as a result, that police department, we also really tried to reach out to local support service agencies that could come in and, for example, we would host multiple interns from the social work departments at Loyola University, from Northwestern's Family Institute, in order to beef up the preventative folks that we had working with kids and a lot of them were younger, so they could go hang out in the cafeteria, and they were kind of cool college graduate students. And I think it was a really wonderful relationship, and that's something they continue to do to this day. So Jadine, sorry, you were going to jump in.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to jump in. I mean, the police department is a very important part of our safety plan. But there's a level, and you would understand this, after the summer of the tragic murder of George Floyd, there was a lot of conversation around that. And where we landed at Chicago Public Schools is we're going to leave it up to the individual school community to decide if they wanted SROs in the building, but we're all going to agree that we can't do this by ourselves. And whether you have SROs in the building or not, we need that partnership. And so we're very fortunate. I heard, what'd you just say, 6 jurisdictions? And someone said 2. We have 1. I go back again. I've got 1 jurisdiction. The new superintendent they just named as interim is someone I've known for over 20 years. So we're very, very lucky that we have that relationship all the way up to the superintendent and to the police board, all the way down to the beat officer that's working all our schools. So, that is really important. The other relationships that we have that are really critical is in Chicago, we have a very rich sort of network of community-based organizations. And so, I mean, you give me the name of a community, Little Village, I'll throw it out. Roseland, I'll throw it out. We're very lucky that in all of these communities, there's a network of community-based organizations who know that community. And so if we have an issue where the school needs additional mental health supports in Pilsen, we got partners that we can reach out to that we have, some we have formal agreements, some we have informal agreements, but they have relationships with our school leaders and our teachers, and we kind of know who to call. Citywide, we obviously work very closely with Lurie Children's Hospital. They're a great partner. But I say all this to say is no school district, I don't know any school district who could do this by themselves. Mm-hmm. And so these relationships are how we are going to all get through this together. I think, was it Mary who mentioned Highland Park? I'm sorry if, I'm from Skokie. I went to Niles North. All right. So, those things that are happening nowadays, you would never imagine to be happening on the North Shore. And it shows it can happen anywhere. And so none of us are immune to this. And so we all have to recognize that, again, we have to all hold hands and work together on this. And, I talk to school districts around the country, and everyone's dealing with these same situations. And what the theme that we keep hearing is just make sure that you have those networks set up, because we all need each other.
One of the things that I was stumped by for many years was when I began working with school districts in the rural parts of Illinois, and where they just don't have the bounty of support services we have in the suburbs or the urban areas in any of the urban centers around Illinois or any of the suburbs around Illinois, when they are the only school district in the county, and the only support service that they have in the county is the county hospital, the one county hospital. And then I talk to those superintendents, and sometimes they have never met the CEO of the county hospital. And there's something they need to reach out and build that, because even if you have one person, one organization you can partner with, as Jadine said, you're not doing it by yourself, and you can't do it by yourself. You have to do it with someone else. So that's, I think, great advice. I don't know, Brian, I don't know if anyone has the answer to that question, but maybe it's about how many school shootings involve student shooters. Are we worried about, I think this is a tough question, but one I would actually love to hear if you have any thoughts on is, in your preparation plans, what are those conversations like? Are you worried more about students who are coming to do with violence against, not just shootings, it's other things as well, or is it the outside intruder that has got you, or is it both? I just would be curious to hear what those conversations have been like.
Mary, do you want to go first? You can go first, Mary.
I was going to say, yes, we're worried about both, because we, up until probably the Georgia shooting, one of the things that we said is no one has shot their way inside of a school. And that was kind of what we've been harping people on, is the prop door, the unlocked door. It's like, look, we can help you, but if you don't, if you're going to prop a door open, then it defeats everything we've already done. I would say that at a high school district, we know probably statistically, most of the high school shootings have occurred with a student or a former student, someone with knowledge of the building. So we're cognizant of that, and we focus on that. And I think the other thing that we'd probably all agree is that, at one point, we talked about, we could lock our schools down and turn them into the equivalent of prisons, and they'd be really, really safe. But the toll that would have on the mental health of the students who had to attend the schools would be so detrimental and outweigh and be so damaging to kids that's not what we want. We want kids to feel safe, and for school to be a respite for them. For some of the kids, it is the safest place that they will be in during the day.
Yep.
I tell all the parents that I meet, I do a lot of parent meetings. After every single school-based mass shooting, we study them. My team and I sit down and we say, what happened? What went wrong? What could they have done differently? What did we learn from this? The pattern I see, I don't have the exact count of active versus inactive former students, but the pattern we see a lot, other than the random, is it's generally someone who has, for whatever, felt either alienated from the school, marginalized from the school, kicked out of the school. And it could be active. It could be someone who's on suspension today or expelled today, or it could be someone who was, who just dropped out because they were bullied or what have you. But it was always someone who did not feel a connection in a positive way. And that is why, back to the prevention thing, it's always about making sure we're not perpetuating that. And so, our biggest thing is when we see social media threats, I see this on the news, and I'm not knocking anybody. We do it differently, but it always makes me crazy when it's a social media threat, student arrested for making social media. Okay, great. So what did you just do? You just separated, you put a wall up, and it's not like that student who was arrested is going to be going away for 30 years. It doesn't work that way. And so what you've just lost is your ability to make that connection with that young person to say, how can we help you? What's going on? And keep them close. I rather keep them close so we know what's going on and making sure that we're giving them the supports. And so our process for threat assessments is not about punitive. It's about making sure that we are giving them the supports. And that's what we like the centralized approach. It's not about suspending them. Great. Now I've given them time to go home and plan something. We go through this whole thing very intensely to make sure that we know what's going on with that child. And so that's our lesson and our message to teachers, which is when you see a child who you see as isolated, who you are concerned that is being bullied, who you think, is the change in behavior, all of those things. And by the way, same thing for adults. You see an adult that's got a change in behavior, let us know immediately. We've got a 24/7 call center. It's our version of a tip line. And we can ask all these questions and do an intervention on this, like immediately. Like we'll go to that kid's house tonight if you know who did that. And so that's really our lesson learned from really watching this since Columbine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, and one of the things that just on this point of the mindset shift that has occurred in schools, and especially here in Illinois. And again, some of you may not be aware of Senate Bill 100, which really tried to shift what we know of as being the school to prison pipeline. That exactly what Jadine's talking about is that the more we can keep kids in school, the fewer of those students who are going to go off and end up doing awful things and ending up in prison or worse, getting killed or whatever. And so we actually, and this is I'll tell you again, I work with administrators who look at me with a sort of a blank stare because they can't even get their heads around the fact that we no longer are sending kids to the principal. That is not this punitive approach of if a kid does something wrong as a teacher, you should send them out. That's the last thing we want to do. We want to keep them in. And keeping them in means acknowledging what they've done, making sure that the whole class is involved with that acknowledgement and understanding that they just didn't do something. It's something that also affected everyone in the classroom. How do we keep the community in the classroom going, even when kids act out or they're shut down or whatever incident has happened? This is a total change in 100 years of discipline. I mean, this is something that none of us experienced as kids, none of us were trained to do as teachers, and we're still not really training teachers on how to avoid kicking kids out, but rather keeping them in. And that's true from a school perspective. We don't want to expel kids. Zero tolerance policies do not work categorically. The research is clear. They should be eliminated from every student handbook, and yet they still exist for little things. And it has led to a real problem in our society. And so this is exactly it. What do we do to know kids well, keep them in, and keep them engaged and involved is a new way of thinking that we're all still working on. Angela, go please.
Just one more thing. Jadine was talking about keeping those kids in and building relationships. I think it really goes to where schools now, well, at least a lot of the things that we're doing at District 63 is where the school is the kind of the cornerstone of that community. So we have our Family Resource Center opened in 2019. So we have a food pantry on site. We have a closet on site. So we have the township and we have the villages that do have resources that we do partner with, we do share. But at the same time, in our kind of immediate area, we don't have Boys and Girls Clubs. We don't have YMCAs. We don't have all these different agencies that are able to support. So having that community center and that space where, the kids are acting out, maybe because they don't have their basic needs met. And so how can we help them do that and help their family so that their housing is stable, so that their food is less insecure, so that they are able to focus and concentrate on school and elevate themselves. And so kind of wrapping around in that holistic approach as well to support the whole child, but realistically their whole life, and help them move into a successful future.
Yeah, it's really a continuum of care. What are we doing across all that? And the old phrase, you have to Maslow before you bloom, that we've got to take care of food, clothing, shelter, safety, both real and perceived, before we can start to engage in some of those other things. Here's a question that has come up a couple of times that, before we got onto the panel and now is what advice do you give teachers in terms of talking to kids? Let's say there's been a soft lockdown, or there's been, as we experienced, here just a couple of weeks ago on campus, classes were going on and we had to go into lockdown mode. But when you're talking with, pre-K through 12 students, what is some advice you would give to teachers in terms of how to talk to kids after there's been an incident? What are some ways that you're seeing teachers working with kids to get them back from maybe a dysregulated state back into a regulated state?
So anytime there's any kind of incident, we activate our building crisis teams, because I think we will tell the teacher, make that connection. But if you have a student who's very dysregulated, get help. And you've got the crisis team, you have the social workers, the psychologists that are there that can help to regulate the student. And I think that that's what we do, is we have the teachers start with that connection conversation with their kids, but sometimes it becomes too involved and they don't have the connection. And sometimes what we talk to the student about is, who are you connected with in the building? Because sometimes that adult that they're most connected with is the custodian, or it's the choir teacher, or it's somebody else. So we'll pull in that student the person who that student is connected with the most, to be part of that conversation. And I'd say that we do that too when we see a student who needs some supports for whatever reason going forward. It helps with advisory, but it's having that connected person check in with them regardless of what their role is. And I think that's probably been the biggest change we've made, is that connection and who they're connected with.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, for us, it's very important that we try to demystify what we're doing here, and especially with the older children, and all these things are age appropriate. We have a different training video for smaller classroom, like earlier classrooms, than we do the high school kids. So there's a different way of talking about it. I mean, one thing I would say, in addition, again, about relationships, is we try to be proactive on this. So we actually also engage parents into this conversation. So we always, we direct schools to make sure that parents know, tomorrow we're doing a drill. I know that some school districts have said to me, oh, but we want it to be a surprise. Like, you don't, it's traumatizing enough. You don't need to make this a surprise. Let parents know tomorrow's the day we're going to do it. Parents, if you have any questions, ask us questions. And same thing with students, ask us questions so we can answer it. And I feel like, going back to sort of the teacher preparedness, we need teachers to feel confident and comfortable in what we're doing here. Because if the teachers aren't comfortable or confident, that's going to translate. Kids will feel that through osmosis. And so we need to make sure that the teachers feel good about and confident in about what we're doing here. I do think that proactive approach is critical. And where we've gotten into trouble is where it's like, oh, we didn't tell anybody and we just do it. And then now people are traumatized because they thought, oh, I thought that was real, because normally we know. And so, like, let's not have any surprises. The real world will surprise us enough. Let's do this in a way that's considerate and intentional, so we all know what the expectations will be.
Yeah, that's great.
I would just add that, to keep an open conversation going in the classroom and to be authentic. A lot of the times, children might show concern or anxiety, and sometimes adults have a tendency to just kind of devalidate or brush off or things like that because they don't want to make it worse. But I think that recognizing those emotions and that's what our SEL framework really supports, is recognize the emotions in the students, recognize them in yourself, have an open conversation that's developmentally appropriate, and don't start a conversation or get into a conversation so deeply that you can't safely come out of that conversation. And just encourage the kids that if there's anything that you need to talk about, questions you have, like in here, and to create that environment. Again, it goes back to building those relationships with all the students.
Is there any, what are some things that I can do if I'm I'm a classroom teacher, I'm an educator here in the state of Illinois. Is there anything I can do locally, in the state or nationally to try to help improve our situation, try to reduce violence, reduce school crises that are happening? Is there anything that you would recommend that I could do maybe to get engaged and try to be part of the solution beyond just what I do in the classroom with the kids?
I think one thing is be aware of all the different bills and things that come to come up for votes, and write to your local and state officials when you see something that you disagree with.
That's great advice.
I love that answer without getting political and taking sides. I know a lot of people's heads went there, I think. I'll follow Angelica's lead and say, be informed. I mean, I have a lot to say on this. I mean, there's a lot of things that make things so much harder than they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll start with something a little bit lower. I say lower stakes, it's all high stakes, but a lot of what's going on with social media is, I mean, for anyone who does school safety, social media is the bane of our existence, right? And day after day, I'm chasing all these anonymous threats, but we will chase them down. I mean, that's why I say to students, like, I want you to be informed. We will find you, I promise you. And we always do. And yet it takes so much time, right? And I think that the upfront of it is, like, if we can partner with, our lawmakers to say, okay, I'm not saying you shut down social media, but maybe there's a balance where there's some accountability so that our social media corporations that are doing quite well financially, maybe they play a role in helping us to sort this out, because a lot of that is the instigation, the inciting, the competition. Like we had an incident the other day where there were videos, like competing videos going back and forth. And thankfully we were able, trusted relationships, someone shared it with us. So we were able to get in the middle of it before something really tragic happened. Meantime, social media companies, they're loving all the hits, they're loving all the ads. But the rest of us are running around trying to stop a violent incident. So I would say that's the kind of stuff I would ask people to advocate for, in addition to other things you might think about advocating for, again, without getting too political.
Yeah, one thing that pops in my mind is that there was a law passed that insisted that every school board have in their policy handbook how they were going to teach kids and adults about depression and suicidal ideation. And that's an example of an attempt to try to legislate something that should be happening anyway, as a way to prevent some things from happening. And especially when we know depression is one of the leading causes that leads us to suicide deaths. And so I think there are some things we can do, but we do have to stay aware. These things quickly can go through the Illinois House and Senate, and we also know that our legislators are really swayed and impacted by emails they receive, by letters that they receive, by going on a day on the Hill when you might go down with some of your fellow teachers to meet directly with those legislators. So, one of the things to think about is how can you get involved and engaged in the issues? And you start by learning about it, by knowing more, so that you're able to advocate for however you want to advocate, whichever direction you want to go, whatever kind of letter you want to send.